Today we're diving into one of London's most incredible lost landmarks. This was a place for the people, believe it or not, the birthplace of a global sport. It's really a story about how a city just writes over its own history, but leaves behind just enough clues for us to piece it all back together. This is the story of White Conduit House, and that really gets into the heart of this whole thing. I mean, how on earth could a simple public footpath completely change the course of sports history? It sounds kind of impossible, but the entire story of White Conduit House really pivots on this one tiny detail that had these massive world changing consequences. Alright, so let's set the scene. We're in Islington at a place called White Conduit House. Now, once upon a time, this was a massive hub of London life, but today it's almost completely vanished, just buried under the layers of the modern city. And what's so wild is the contrast. This place was a huge deal. It was culturally significant. But today you can just literally walk right past what's left of it and not even blink. There's a restaurant, a couple of community gardens, and that's it. These are the last faint echoes of what used to be here. So you have to wonder, how did this place even come to be? Well, its story doesn't start with entertainment or parties. It starts with something way more basic: fresh water. This is the very first layer of our story. So the original building was a medieval water pipe, basically a conduit built way, way back in 1431. But then the new infrastructure comes along and suddenly it's obsolete. So its whole purpose gets erased and then brilliantly rewritten. It gets a whole new lease of life as a pleasure garden, a place for Londoners who are just desperate for an escape from the crowded, dirty city. And listen, this wasn't for the aristocrats, no way. Unlike the really famous gardens of Vauxhall, this place was proudly democratic. It was affordable. It welcomed the working class, and it was even described as barely respectable, which, probably just made it even more popular with everybody. Now, the guy who really put it on the map was a marketing genius named Robert Bartholomew back in 1754. And he wasn't just selling drinks and snacks. Oh no, he was selling an idea in an age when you couldn't trust the food you were eating. He promised purity milk straight from the cow, fresh, hot bread, and clean air. It was brilliant. He wasn't just talk, he backed it all up with some really clever design. He put in an elegant promenade, for strolling, and a fish pond for the vibe. He built these shady little arbours to give people some privacy. But maybe the most important thing he did was build a 7-foot high fence. That created this feeling of exclusivity, and it turned a regular field into a private escape. His formula worked. The garden became a real cultural touchstone. It even got a shout out from the famous writer Oliver Goldsmith, and it acted as a launch pad for up and coming talent, like young organist James Huck. And he got his big break here before becoming a super famous composer. But for all its famous bread and its music, the garden's most important legacy wasn't any of that. It was the result of a complete accident, an annoyance really, that would end up creating a global sport. Okay, so by the 1780s, the fields next to the garden were home to the White Conduit Club, and this place perfectly shows you the class dynamics of the time. You had these wealthy gentlemen, the amateurs, who would actually hire the country's best professional players to play cricket against them. But there was a huge problem. A public footpath, a legal right-of-way that anyone could use. Right smack bang in the middle of the cricket pitch. Just try to imagine it. These lords and dukes taking their game so seriously, constantly being interrupted by farmers and carts and just regular people walking on by. Well, eventually their frustration just boiled over. They complained publicly about it, and they demanded a private ground. So they put up the money and backed a groundsman named Thomas Lord to find one. In 1787 he did just that, and he opened a new exclusive ground in Marylebone, and the whole White Conduit Club just packed up, moved, and renamed themselves the Marylebone Cricket Club. or the MCC. Right there. That's the punchline. The MCC, born entirely out of frustration over a public footpath, became the governing body that standardised the rules and created the entire structure of a modern global cricket. An inconvenience literally shaped a sport for centuries. It's incredible. But the best part, we actually know what it looked like. There's this amazing painting from 1784 by Robert Dickin, and that is basically a time capsule. It shows the cricket match going on, you can see the tea house and even the original white stone conduit building way off in the distance. But as the MCC started to flourish, White Conduit House began its slow decline. The city that had made it famous would in the end be the very thing that consumed it, writing a new chapter right on top of the old one. You can see them trying to adapt. The owners rebranded it. They added circus-style shows. They even tore down the old tavern and built this massive new banqueting house. But it was just too late. Urban sprawl, industrial pollution. It completely destroyed that rural escape vibe. And by 1849, the whole thing was torn down for housing. And that's the central irony of the whole story, isn't it? The very fresh country air that was its original selling point was only possible because it was on the edge of the city, which of course made it prime real estate for London's unstoppable expansion. A new layer of the city was bound to be written there. The old story wasn't completely erased. If you go there, there's a Victorian building on the original site. It's a restaurant now and it has the name White Conduit House carved right into the stone. And it's a direct physical link to the past. And the spirit of the garden itself is still there too. The Culpeper Community Garden. This beautiful green space run by volunteers sits on land that was once part of those original formal grounds. It's another trace of what came before. Best of all, you can still visit the scene of the crime. Thornhill Road Gardens is part of that historic cricket ground. There's even a plaque there that marks a spot where a simple footpath changed the world of sport forever. The whole story of White Conduit House really shows us that London's history doesn't completely get erased. It just gets written over. But the older layers, the name on a building, a community garden, a park, they're still visible if you know how to look for them. Which leaves us with one last thought. This was just the story of one incredible pleasure garden and one footpath. But it really makes you wonder what other incredible world-changing stories are hidden right under our feet, just waiting for us to discover them. Find out more about the White Conduit House in the full episode of the London History Podcast, episode 154.